Hi everyone. I chose to look at teacher-generated formative and summative assessments. How would you describe this data collection technique and what processes and procedures are unique to it? So, data collection piece is the teacher-generated tests, and teachers develop their own tests from scratch, making it much more adaptable to what they're actually teaching and what they want to assess information on. The process and procedures for that is, having accessible information about how other students are responding to a particular lesson. And that can be in the middle of the lesson with your formative assessments. Checking to make sure, where your students are at, if they're grasping the material that's being taught, or if there's area that they need to go back and be retaught something. With the end of the unit accumulation, the summative assessments, it takes, the capstone course of all the information taught that unit to see what was comprehended and understood. Teacher-generated tests can be oral or written, giving it some flexibility. And also, there can be teacher-made rubrics that can go along with the testing or the projects made by teachers. One specific quote that stood out to me in the reading this week was in our Mills book. It was on page 133. Often teachers adapt rather than adopt commercial curriculum to be a valid measure of student performance. And I just think that is so true, with all the backlash teachers get, teachers really do what is best for their students. And I think teacher-generated tests is just one form of that. Really trying to get to the root of what your students are learning and understanding rather than just, a standardized test that applies for the whole class or the whole grade. Is it qualitative or quantitative data? So teacher-made tests are quantitative forms of data collection, and it's actually one of the most common forms. Some questions that this technique would best answer would be, what specific goals or objectives are met or not met during a lesson or a subject area? What methods of teaching adopted by the teacher and other curricular programs of the school are working or not working? And could your students comprehend and apply a skill that they just learned? With these assessments, I just gave some examples, fact fluency, word problem solving, comprehension questions, and it could also be used in, your other subject areas such as social studies and science, not just, your main ELA and math. What concerns do I have about, this data collection in particular would be, is it designed to measure what it was supposed to measure? Is my test that I designed testing everything that I taught them? Or is it testing things that I'm hoping they're going to know by the end of this? What is really the design of my test, and is that benefiting the students and what I'm looking for? Is the scoring system consistent with that of the school and the state benchmarks? This is something I thought was also interesting. Is the calculations of your scores, equivalent to what the curriculum tests that were offered, similar or not, or what the school is looking for per subject area? And will all the students have the same opportunities to show what they have learned? Are all the students being given this test the same way? Or are you having some accommodations throughout for specific students and how their learning abilities? What are some strengths and weaknesses of teacher-made test? I had a lot more strengths than weaknesses when I was coming across my information on this topic. Not relying solely on unit tests to determine their mastery was a big one for me. It came along with that vocabulary word, triangulation, using multiple sources of data. We don't want just one piece of the puzzle piece to see how our students are doing. We need, multiple outlets where we're collecting from. Aiding teachers in the ability to monitor and adjust instruction, which is something else that is really important. We need to always be adjusting our instruction based on our students' needs. Another topic is more meaningful data. If we are designing the tests ourselves, geared toward what we are teaching them and what we are hoping for them to learn with their objectives and standards being met, we're going to have more meaningful data collection. It can be oral or written, like I stated before, as another strength. And for the teacher, it can give students more immediate and constructive feedback. to them. Definitely more immediate than standardized testing when it takes months for us to get those results back. So it's definitely a quicker turnaround. Weaknesses. If you're using a test that another teacher made, whether it's your colleague at the same grade level, or if it's a test that was made from someone off Teacher Pay Teachers, you really want to make sure that it is assessing your students on what you have taught them. Some teachers may not have the necessary abilities to design their own test, and therefore evaluations may be less reliable. With one of my previous grad classes that I have taken, it talked about, making your test that has variety, but also where students are able to understand, you can have confusing questions or you're not trying to trick your students when they're doing these tests. So depending on the teacher's background knowledge on how to design a test, that could also cause some unreliability in the assessment data. So that is all the information I have.